Picture it. Los Angeles, 2005. After 4 kinda seasons, Star Trek Enterprise has been canceled. Despite drawing lackluster ratings and never approaching the popularity of its predecessors in the franchise, especially the widely beloved Star Trek The Next Generation, Enterprise has attracted a loyal fan base of its own, a fan base full of people that now, in May of 2005, gather in front of their televisions, eager to see how the creators of this, the most recent and, who knows, perhaps last, of the Star Trek series, will wrap up its run. And what they watch for the next hour turns out to be one of the most reviled episodes, and certainly the most reviled series finale in all of Star Trek. What the hell happened? Let's see if we can figure that out as we examine why Star Trek Enterprise actually has the worst ending ever. Let's start with the episode itself, and I'll do that thing where I summarize the story in a really breezy, smart-alecky kind of way. Sound good? Good. Some of you may have objected, but I couldn't hear you because we're not actually conversing. It's only a rhetorical device. Anyway, the episode, the final episode of Star Trek Enterprise, is titled, These Are the Voyages. This episode takes place several years after the previous episode of Enterprise, so we open with the crew carrying on some as-you-know chit-chat. Apparently, they've now been serving aboard Enterprise for 10 years. And coming up soon, there's going to be the signing of a big, important charter. And also, Starfleet wants Captain Archer to bring Enterprise back to Earth so they can decommission it real good. You know, it's funny, with all that exposition, I didn't notice the guy sitting off to the side there at the bridge station. He looks just like Commander Riker, doesn't he? That's weird. Oh shit, did he just say computer freeze program? Oh shit, did he just say end program? Oh shit, are we on the holodeck? Of the Enterprise D? Has the entire series taken place inside the holodeck aboard the Enterprise D? Did Berman and Braga just Tommy Westfall this thing? Oh my god, Riker cameoed in an episode of Voyager too! Does that mean Voyager was all one of Riker's holodeck programs too? Even the episode where Barclay is running his own holodeck version of Voyager? Is Barclay's holodeck version of Voyager actually inside Riker's holodeck version of Voyager? No, that's just me latching on to the mildly clever conceit of Riker running holodeck programs based on another Star Trek show and getting carried away with it. Wouldn't know anything about that, would you fellas? Anyway, it turns out the Enterprise scene was part of a holodeck program Riker is running to help him figure out what to do about his former commanding officer, Admiral Pressman, who has just arrived aboard the Enterprise D. You Next Gen fans will probably remember that Pressman's reunion with Riker and the hijinks that ensued were part of the episode The Pegasus during TNG's 7th season. Now that is a good episode. Way better than this one. Can we just talk about The Pegasus instead? Nah, never mind. I hate it when the creators change the premise of something midway through. Wouldn't know anything about that, would you, fella? Anyway, Riker talks to Troy in 10 Forward, and he's like, that holo program you told me to run has nothing to do with the problem I'm facing, and this whole thing already feels really forced and slapped together. And Troy's like, just skip ahead to when the Andorian hails him. So Riker goes back to the Enterprise holodeck program and skips ahead to the part where the Andorian, meaning Shran, Captain Archer's best frenemy, hails Enterprise to ask Archer for help in rescuing his daughter, who has been abducted by, I don't know, somebody. Archer agrees to help. Shran comes aboard the ship and tells him his daughter is being held at the trading outpost on Rigel 10, which is a nice callback to the series' debut episode, when the crew of the Enterprise visited Rigel 10 during their first mission. So it's like poetry, it's like they rhyme. T'Pol meets with Archer, and she's like, you know, the thing about Shran is, he's a dickweed, and I don't trust him. And Archer's like, you're just racist against Andorians. Just like I was racist against Vulcans when I met you, but now I'm cured. So you should cure your racism too, by not giving me any more shit about helping Shran. Also, go talk to the chef, because he wants to know your favorite dish for the crew's last meal together. T'Pol goes to the galley to talk to the chef, who is now being played by Riker, and does this seem fanfickish to anyone else? I mean, it was pretty fanfickish to start with, what with the premise of framing an episode of one Star Trek show as a holodeck program being watched by a character from another Star Trek show. But now there's the added wrinkle of Riker playing a member of the crew and interacting with the Enterprise characters, so it's become a fanfic from his perspective, too. Oh, and right at the end of the scene, T'Pol says some shit about how she's learned that following orders isn't always the most important thing, and she's learned to embrace the human way of relying on your instincts sometimes, and Riker's like, hey, that's relevant to my present dilemma, thanks! And then he freezes the program and kisses T'Pol on the cheek like a creep. They should have had Barclay walk in right at the moment Riker was kissing T'Pol so he could be like, aha! Got you, you hypocritical bastard! And then Riker could say, just wait until I find that minuet program I've been looking for since the first season, and then I'll show you some holodeck hypocrisy. I ain't gonna take no nap in her skirt folds. I'll tell you that much. I'm writing a better episode instead of summarizing this one. I apologize. Where were we? Troy joins Riker in the program. He gives her a tour of the ship. They reference Captain Picard and Captain Kirk in tragically misguided attempts at fan service. Then they head to engineering to eavesdrop on Trip and Reed talking about the mission to Rigel 10. And Troy's like, isn't it sad? Commander Tucker has no idea he won't make it back from this mission. And the first time watching this episode, we were all like, what did she say? They wouldn't do that, would they? Kill off a main character in the final episode, which has already worn out its welcome thanks to its poorly conceived central gimmick? No, they've pressed their luck enough already. Not a chance they kill Trip. But before that happens, Trip and T'Pol are in a shuttle pod on their way down to Rigel 10, and T'Pol turns to Trip and says, so do you ever miss me? Which she's thinking about because during her conversation with the chef earlier, he asked her if she misses Trip since they broke up like 6 years ago. Except that was Riker playing the chef who asked her that. So T'Pol's character in this holodeck program is reacting to her interactions with Riker. Interesting. Let's come back to that. So they go down to Rigel 10, they rescue Shran's daughter, they make it back to the ship, everything seems fine. Archer and Trip are hanging out in the captain's mess, talking about the charter that's about to be signed on Earth and the alliance it will form. Archer pulls out a bottle of whiskey that Zephram Cochrane gave to his father, and they drink a toast, which Archer dedicates to the next generation. Oh, oh, you poor bastards. You really thought the fans would love this, didn't you? It's sad. You had no idea you wouldn't make it back from this episode. Obviously, things don't continue to go smoothly. The ship is attacked. The space pirates who abducted Shran's daughter are back. They board the ship, and Archer and Tucker meet them in the corridor, and Trip's like, hey, knock the captain out, and I'll take you to Shran and his daughter. The space pirates are like, cool. They knock out Archer. Trip leads them down the hallway a little, then says, hey, I've got to take this comm panel apart to disable security. Cool? Space pirates are like, cool. Trip pulls a tube out of the panel, pulls another tube out of the ceiling, and he looks at the space pirates and he says, there's just one more thing. You can all go straight to hell. And he puts the tubes together and everything goes boom. But is that really the best one-liner they could come up with for Trip to say before he blows up the bad guys, mortally injuring himself in the process? You can all go straight to hell? Kind of generic, ain't it? What about having one of the space pirates get impatient and ask where Shran is? Then Trip could respond, sorry fellas, looks like you just Shran out of time. Too much of a stretch? How about this one? Have a nice trip. Or not. I'm just saying, it's the death of a major character and the last episode. Make an effort. Trip dies. T'Pol is in his quarters, smelling his clothes in a tender, melancholy moment, when Archer comes in and is like, hey, don't forget to pack his Frankenstein action figure. Riker rewinds the tape a few hours and steps into the role of the chef once more to chat with not dead yet Trip about what he wants for his last meal. They end up talking about Captain Archer, and Riker's like, so what, are you guys friends or something? And Trip says, Archer is one of the few people I trust, like really trust, like trust so much that I know he'll always be there for me, like trust so much that I'd be willing to tell him anything, any secret, even a secret I'd been ordered to keep by a higher-ranking officer about an extremely sensitive matter of interplanetary intelligence, a secret which also involves a dark episode from my past about which I've been concealing the truth for over a decade. Know what I mean? And Riker's like, no, not really. Then Archer, T'Pol, and Phlox are backstage before Archer's big speech at the signing of the charter. Archer's nervous because he hasn't memorized the speech, but T'Pol's like, relax, it's a prequel, but it's still the future. They've got teleprompters that project the script directly onto your corneas or something. And then Phlox is like, well, I've got 3 wives waiting for me out there, and I guess leaving for 10 years on a deep space assignment is all I can do to avoid spending time with them, so I better go. He leaves, and T'Pol and Archer have a final moment together. Then he walks out to give the speech. Riker and Troi are watching from the balcony. Riker resolves the central conflict of the final episode of Star Trek Enterprise by saying, I think I'm ready to talk to Captain Picard about Admiral Pressman. I should have done it a long time ago. And I'm watching this in 2005 like, you did, brother! That episode was like 10 years ago! Riker and Troi leave the holodeck. The episode closes with a montage of Picard's Enterprise, Kirk's Enterprise, and Archer's Enterprise all flying past camera as we hear the voices of Picard, Kirk, and Archer take turns reciting lines from the Space, the Final Frontier opening narration of classic Trek and TNG. And that's it! So, this is a bad episode, and an even worse series finale, but before I talk about why I hold that opinion, let me do something that those of us who dislike this episode don't often do, and talk about the parts of it that actually work. Because there are a few. For instance, bringing back Shran. Good idea. Always nice to see Jeffrey Combs pop up in a Star Trek show, and while I never felt like Shran was on the level of Combs' best-known character in the franchise, Deep Space Nine's delightfully obsequious Dominion middle manager Weyoun, Shran did wind up being one of the more memorable and well-developed recurring characters on Enterprise. Another thing I like, at least in theory, are the callbacks to the first episode of Enterprise, like revisiting Rigel 10, Archer referencing his former mistrust of Vulcans, the references to Archer's father and Zefram Cochrane. They help to create the impression of a larger arc, to pull the series together. Another thing, while it's not a good idea in and of itself, it's such a bad idea, in fact, that the writers of the Star Trek novels retconned it pretty much immediately. I like the way they handled Trip's death. He sacrifices himself to save his crewmates, in particular his best friend, Captain Archer. We last see him in sickbay, about to undergo an emergency treatment, trying to put on a brave face. Then we cut to T'Pol in his quarters, packing his things, and the scene allows us to catch up to the fact that Trip has died. Very understated, very effective. Finally, the episode's main gimmick of it taking place within Riker's holodeck program could have worked, just under different circumstances. It's a very clever device for getting Riker onto a series that's set 200 years before his time. And despite the problems it creates, which I'll get to in a few minutes, having Riker insert himself into the program by playing Enterprise's chef is a cute way of paying off the running gag of never seeing the chef without actually letting us see him. But it's all much better suited to a mid-season episode. Might have made a good stunt to goose the ratings during sweeps. As a series finale, though, I'm having trouble coming up with a worse gimmick for a series finale. After These Are the Voyages originally aired, Peter David, prolific writer of Star Trek novels and comic books, described it as a guy in a Starfleet outfit sitting around watching a rerun of Star Trek, which is just about perfect. He goes on to say, then again, my ideal episode would have involved Sam Beckett leaping out of the body of Jonathan Archer and to his next adventure. So, did I steal that from Peter David? I don't think I did, but did I? Oh well, if you're going to rip somebody off, it might as well be the guy who wrote Retrospect. Peter David is right. It's a problem when the protagonist of the final episode of a series is a character from another series, and none of the characters from the series that's ending even appear as themselves, only as holographic simulations of themselves. But David only describes half the problem. Not only is Riker watching a Star Trek rerun on the holodeck, the episode itself is set during a Star Trek rerun, Next Gen's The Pegasus. The only TNG characters we see are Riker and Troi, and other than the holodeck, the only locations aboard the Enterprise D we see are 10 forward, some corridors, and Troy's quarters. Would it have been so impossible to set the Riker portions of the story post-Nemesis? Come up with another excuse for why he's watching the Enterprise program and show us a tantalizing glimpse of what life is like for him as the captain of the USS Titan? I know Berman and Braga were hoping setting the episode during the Pegasus and recreating the Enterprise D would be taken as a tribute to TNG and a fun way to close out their era of the franchise, but trust me, by the time Enterprise ended, it was the last thing the show's remaining audience was interested in seeing. Instead of playing as a hat tip to TNG and the franchise as a whole, it comes across as an insult to Enterprise. Were those characters not fit to close out their own series? Did they really need ringers from TNG to come in and take center stage? During their last show ever? If I were an Enterprise fan, which I wasn't really, I watched the last episode when it aired, but I was pretty over the show by that point. They lost me when they added Star Trek to the title, if you want to know the truth. But if I were an Enterprise fan, I'd have been rather annoyed. Because it's not just that the episode is Riker and Troy watching a holodeck simulation of Archer's Enterprise. If that was the case, it would still be a bad idea for a series finale, but at least you could tell yourself, well, the events Riker is watching did actually happen, so we are seeing the final mission of Archer's Enterprise just one step removed. Riker inserting himself into the program as the chef, and the other characters behaving differently due to his presence, ruins that, however. Remember the scene in the shuttle pod when T'Pol asks Trip if he ever misses her? That conversation is so obviously inspired by T'Pol's earlier conversation with Riker as the chef that it's difficult to imagine it taking place without it. But that conversation between T'Pol and the chef never actually happened. That was Riker interacting with a character on the holodeck. And his interaction with T'Pol affected the way the rest of the program played out. It apparently didn't alter any of the major events. Troy anticipated Trip's death, so that happened in real life, as did the signing of the charter and Archer's speech, which Riker and Troy don't even bother to watch, though Troy does say she had to memorize it in school, so maybe they're sick of hearing it by that point. But the point is, Riker's presence affects what happens in the program, even if only in subtle ways, which reinforces to us in the audience that we aren't watching the real Captain Archer and crew of the Enterprise NX-01. We aren't seeing what really happened during their final mission. We're watching Riker view and participate in a holodeck recreation of that mission. It can be difficult enough to suspend disbelief when you're watching a sci-fi adventure series to begin with. I mean, I love Star Trek. I should hope that's obvious by now, but let's face it. Even at its best, the show is full of some deeply silly shit. Spaceships travel from star system to star system in the same amount of time it takes for us to drive from city to city. Everybody dresses in pajamas, and nobody ever says a word about it. The aliens are obviously humans with shit glued to their heads. It's just goofy. In order for it to work as drama, you have to see past the goofiness and emotionally invest in the characters as though they were real people. But in Enterprise's final episode, most of the characters we're watching aren't even real people within the fiction of the episode. They're holographic simulations of real people who are long dead by the era in which the episode actually takes place. The only real characters are Riker and Troy, and of those two, the only one who has anything remotely meaningful to do is Riker. And the only thing he has to do is make a decision that, from our perspective in the audience, he's already made because it was part of an episode that first aired in 1990 goddamn four. I mean, imagine if the final film in the Star Wars prequel trilogy had a frame story set during Luke's first visit to Dagobah back in Empire Strikes Back, and the scenes set during the era of the prequels were presented as a story Yoda was telling Luke in order to get some bullshit Jedi lesson through his thick skull. And as the story went on, it became obvious that Yoda was embellishing and changing things for his own purposes, so the version we were seeing wasn't even what actually happened. You know what? Bad example, because that would have been way better than what we got. But I thought the prequels were terrible. Lots of other people really liked the prequels and cared about those characters. I can't for the life of me figure out why, but they did. And I'm sure they would have been very annoyed had the last film of that trilogy sidelined those characters in favor of characters from another, more popular trilogy. And, utterly inexplicable taste in Star Wars movies aside, they would have had every right to be annoyed, because it doesn't make sense to end a series with a story centered on characters from a totally different series. It's just a bad idea, and looking back, it's baffling how it ever made it out of a pitch meeting, let alone into production and on TV. Of course, the Riker on the holodeck during the Pegasus bits aren't the only troubles the episode has. Even without those scenes, it would still be difficult to pull off as a series finale because the Enterprise set elements of the story take place 6 years after the events of the next to last episode. So even if we judge the show based only on what happens to Archer and his crew and ignore the Riker holodeck stuff, we've still got a story that plays more like a reunion special than a series finale. Enterprise has never been my favorite Star Trek series, but I do have a soft spot for it. Of all the Star Trek projects produced during the TNG Golden Era, it feels the most like a missed opportunity. There are missed opportunities aplenty in Voyager too, but looking back, it seems like the creators of Voyager never had much ambition beyond making a blandly likable show that would run for 7 years and then get added to the syndication package. When it began, Enterprise felt like an honest attempt to do something different, to take the franchise in a fresh direction. It was a prequel, it was set during an era of Star Trek history that had never really been explored, the technology wasn't quite as advanced as it had been in TNG, DS9, Voyager, many of the familiar aliens had not yet been encountered by humanity, and, for the first 2 seasons anyway, Star Trek wasn't even in the title. Unfortunately, the show spent most of its 4-year run searching for an identity. The producers of Enterprise could never quite settle on what kind of a show they wanted it to be. It was too dorky and wholesome to work as a sexy sci-fi show, but its attempts at being sexy and edgy often made it an awkward choice for family entertainment too. It began as a show about a mission of exploration, tried to be a gritty 9/11-inspired serial, then spent much of its final season playing around in the sandbox of Star Trek lore. This lack of narrative focus put a lot of weight on the shoulders of the show's cast, and they carried it the best that they could. You'll never hear me say a bad word about Scott Bakula. He's an immensely talented and likable actor, and he leads a terrific cast. Look up and down the roster, you won't find a clunker in the bunch, and a few of them are consistently excellent, especially John Billingsley as Phlox and Jolene Blalock as T'Pol, once the writers give her a character to play other than grumpy, sexy Vulcan in a catsuit. Enterprise was never a great show, was very often not even a good show, but it and its cast deserved better than the ending it got. Rick Berman described These Are the Voyages as a Valentine to Star Trek fans. It marked the conclusion of an 18-year run during which there was always a Star Trek TV series in production. Instead of reminding fans of what they loved about that era of Star Trek, the final episode of Enterprise made that ending feel underwhelming and long overdue. Hey folks, well, there you have it. What did you think of the final episode of Star Trek Enterprise? Is it as bad as I'm making it out to be? Is it not as bad as I'm making it out to be? Are you someone who never really got why people thought it was such a terrible episode? Do you think it's far, far worse than I said and that I'm actually giving it too much credit? Whatever you think, please leave a comment. Let us all know what you think about the last episode of Star Trek Enterprise and what you think about what I think about the last episode of Star Trek Enterprise. I'm going to let you know what the topic of the next regulation episode of Trek Actually is going to be in just a few minutes. But first, I want to give some shout outs to my newest $5 or more per month Patreon patrons. And their names are Robert Cubito, thank you, Robert. Cooper Benson, thank you, Cooper. Ultrawave 7, thank you, Ultrawave 7. Nebulosity, thank you, Nebulosity. Layered Abstractions, thank you, Layered Abstractions. Fellar, thank you, Fellar. Layla V, thank you, Layla V. Nonstop Pop, thank you, Nonstop Pop. Miss World. Thank you, Miss World. And Leo Baker. Thank you, Leo. Thanks to everybody who is a patron of this channel at whatever level you are pledging, however long you have been pledging. You can become a patron for as little as $1 a month to support this channel, and really, believe me, those $1 a month pledges help me out a lot. But for $5 a month or more, you get yourself a shout out at the end of a Regulation Trek Actually video, and for a Patreon pledge of any amount, you get to participate in the monthly polls that determine the topics of future Regulation Trek Actually videos. So that's something to think about if you enjoy the Star Trek stuff and you want to help out and help to support me as I continue to make it. Also, I want to remind you, if you love the Star Trek stuff that I do on this channel, I am the co-host of a Star Trek themed comedy podcast called The Ensign's Log. And on The Ensign's Log, myself and the brilliant and hilarious Jason Harding play characters who are low-ranking officers serving aboard a certain famous Federation starship as it embarks on a certain historic 5-year journey. I think you get where I'm coming from here. And The Ensign's Log is currently, we're closing in on the end of Season 2, and our Season 2 corresponds with Season 2 of Classic Trek. All of our episodes roughly sort of correspond or take place during the same time period as the episodes of Star Trek, the original series. So we're getting close to the end of our second season. It's been so much fun to do. Jason and I are so pleased with how the show has turned out and so proud of it, and I'm very happy that so many of you who watch my Trek Actually videos have given it a shot and listened to it and said that you liked it. So if you have not listened to the Ensign's Log and you would like to check it out, the links are in the description of this video. You can listen on SoundCloud where it's hosted. You can listen through the website. You can subscribe via RSS using your favorite podcast app. Check out the Ensign's Log. I hope you will enjoy hearing it as much as Jason and I enjoy making it, although I doubt it, because as I said a second ago, we really, we're so insufferably pleased with ourselves over the Ensign's Log, so I hope you enjoy it too. Now, the next episode of I have a couple of scheduling announcements to make. The next scripted episode of Trek Actually will actually be next week. It's a special episode that I'm doing in conjunction with a bunch of other Star Trek YouTubers. I was actually invited to do this by my pal Jesse Gender, who also does great Star Trek videos. I've mentioned Jesse's videos once or twice on here before. And Jesse had the idea that a bunch of us should get together and do some Captain Picard themed videos to mark the upcoming debut of the Star Trek Picard TV series. So my next scripted Trek Actually video will be a short little video that I'm going to do about my favorite Captain Picard moment. So that will come next week, so watch for that. And then you'll also get a link in that video to the playlist with all of the other Trek-themed YouTubers who are doing Captain Picard-themed videos that day. We're calling it Captain Picard Day, which I think is appropriate. I did not come up with that, and I'm not taking credit for it, but one of us said, hey, we should call it Captain Picard Day. And I think that's great. So watch for that next week. And then next month will be the next regularly scheduled Trek Actually video, Regulation Trek Actually video that was chosen by the most recently completed poll on my Patreon page. And the subject of that video, as chosen by many of you, my wonderful viewers and my Patreon patrons who participated in the poll, the subject of next month's Regulation Trek Actually video will be why 7 of 9 was actually more than eye candy. First month in the poll for this topic, and it won by a landslide. And I cannot say I am terribly surprised. It's one of those things like the Damar video. I knew when I put the Damar topic in that was going to win the first time. And I had a feeling 7 of 9 was going to win the first time I put this topic in the poll. And it did resoundingly. So that'll be next month's Trek Actually video. Why 7 of 9 was actually more than eye candy. Very topical, as it turns out, because 7 of 9 has a role in the upcoming Star Trek Picard series as well. So see, it all ties together. I'm not just throwing shit out there, okay? This isn't just some random. This is all part of a very, very well calculated plan, okay? So that's. I don't think I can I don't think I can keep up that pretense for very much longer. So anyway, it just happened to work out like that. I'm very glad that it did. I'm looking forward to doing the 7 of 9 video. I hope you will enjoy it. Watch for the Picard video next week. Watch for a Not Actually, Trek Actually video coming out sometime between the Picard video and the 7 of 9 video in those weeks in the intervening time period. I want to do a Not Actually, Trek Actually, where I kind of go back and re-examine the episode we just spent this video talking about, the finale of Enterprise, and I'll try to do something like I did for the last episode of Star Trek Voyager and pitch a rewrite of how they could have done, or how maybe I would have done if I could go back in time and redo the Enterprise finale, how you can make it better than it actually was. I'm gonna try something like that. That was fun last time. So I'm gonna do a rewrite of the Enterprise finale as well. So that'll be coming out at some point in the nebulous nearish future after next week's Picard video, before next month's 7 of 9 video. So now you know. Now you have a general idea of what is coming up Star Trek related on this channel. So thank you all so much for watching this video. Thank you all for watching all my videos that you watch. I appreciate your support and your attention. Take care, everybody. I'll see you next time.